This is Playlist Parlay, and I'm your host, Josh Serto. Episode 1, The Essential Van Halen with Marshall Henry. My guest today is Marshall. This is the first episode of Playlist Parlay, and I wonder how bad this is going to be in a year.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't even episode 1. This is episode 0.
It really is.
So by me doing this, you actually owe me another chance in like another 6 to 8 months.
That sounds fair.
A do-over.
All right. I appreciate your bravery in coming in and trying to do this with me as a project.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm a fan of the process of iterative improvement. You know, I like releasing things that aren't perfect and then carving away at them. You know, just to try and chase the optimization.
Just like Michelangelo.
But you don't have the sound effect.
No, actually,
Sorry.
I do. Check that out.
Ah, there you go.
There we go. We have one of those. All right. So this is Marshall Henry. He's a multi-instrumentalist and songwriter from right here in Sonora, California. So Marshall, tell us about what you've done with music professionally and what you have going on now.
Yeah, so for me, just a quick synopsis of how I started. So my name is Marshall, which for the uninitiated, that's the name of a very popular guitar amplifier. And for those that are really in the know, you also know that Jimi Hendrix's middle name was Marshall. So my dad was a fan, let's put it mildly. I was raised to play guitar as a baby, and I think the first gift I got that meant anything was Mario 64, but the second gift I got that meant anything was an Ibanez guitar. And I'm trying to remember what the model was, but I think it was actually from the Joe Satriani series. So my father always wanted me to play the guitar, and I was sort of adamant about not playing it because it was hard. And I didn't like hard things. Mario 64, what?
So how old were you when you get this guitar?
I think it was 7.
Wow.
Yeah, so way too young. The guitar is huge. I mean, so it took a few years. And then, you know, a friend of mine down the road started playing guitar, and I thought, well, I've got an avenue to be way cooler than you. I'm not going to let you play Sweet Home Alabama around me. And then, you know, spite wins the day.
That's right.
And I have my dad teach me guitar. So anyway, I started playing seriously when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And since then, I've played with, you know, high school bands, jazz bands. And I think beyond doing some of my own solo stuff and working with other musicians from about the age of 23 when I did my stint in Nashville, I came back and played really with you. I think for the last 10 years, you're the musician I've probably played most consistently with. And then, of course, that's with Grover Anderson and Murphys. So from that, I've had some great opportunities that you'll be able to share, and that would be, you know, playing with Creedence Clearwater Revisited, America, playing the Salmon Fest Festival in Alaska. So we've had some good times together.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to recant your memory of how we got to know each other and that weird audition process I did?
Yeah, so me and a friend of mine, Cisco Garcia, he was playing bass, I was playing guitar. And we were just going to put together a 3-piece because we were both in college and we wanted to make some money. He was a theater singer and I was not a singer, but I've never been afraid of making a fool of myself. So we thought, let's just sing together and find a drummer. And I think he put an ad someplace on MySpace or Facebook Music, whatever was the thing back then, I don't know. And you may have been the third in line, something like that. And we had these 2 other guys come in. I've never seen them again in the community, by the way. I don't know who they were, but they came in. They were fine, you know. They were serviceable, workmanlike, and then you came in, and you were too good, and you knew it. So it was highly intimidating to a couple of 19-year-olds. Like, okay, well, we're not going to be able to make enough money to pay this guy's bills, so let's just move on. And then the 4th guy in line was a friend of mine named Dallas, and he was our age and a lot of fun. Really liked Dallas. Oh, we haven't kept in touch. He's gone on to bigger, better things in his professional life. But we ended up working with you, and it's just been a great relationship ever since. You've brought a lot of opportunities my way, and I've very generously brought almost none your way. So
yeah, well, you know, I mean, we'll get there.
Yeah, life is long.
Yeah, and for me, two lifelong friends. I mean, you and I are, work together and do a lot of musical stuff. But outside of that, we've become pretty close.
Yeah,
as friends.
You were a groomsman at my wedding.
That's true. I was. Yeah. I even made a speech I didn't plan to make.
I know. I called you up impromptu. Thought, let's get
right.
those improv muscles working.
That's right.
Kind of like now.
Yeah, and Cisco too. I think both of us. He's moved to Southern California. We don't see him as much these days, but. Every time I kind of go through that region, I try to stop and say hello.
Yeah, I've seen him a couple times since. Him and I have actually connected a little more recently because I just had the birth of my first child, and then, of course, he became a father. Maybe it was 3 years prior, actually. So it's been a little while since he had his first son.
Well, his second boy was born right around your
Right
daughter.
around the same time, yeah.
Right.
So we've kind of gotten a chance to reconnect over that. Not that we've drifted, but, we're both busy in our other lives, so you can only connect so much.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. So when I was thinking about questions to ask, just form questions, what do I want to ask every guest? I kind of was thinking about how most people's music starts in one of four places. It's going to either start from a musical family or in the schools, public school or private school, or private lessons, or a musical family. Which of those do you think really applies to you?
I think the musical family applies, not necessarily that my whole family was musical, but my dad was a gigging guitar player in his 20s, and he never really outgrew it. He was always trying to find another avenue to play music in, so I eventually became the avenue to play music when he could no longer do it himself. So I think the family element really applies to me. I've had some really good guitar teachers over the year. One of my favorites was Greg Knoll, who I'm sure many listeners will know. And I would say they played just as big a part as my father did in bringing me into the world of guitar and kind of showing me what's behind the curtain. So first family, but then I would say private lessons after. School, not so much. There aren't a lot of avenues for guitar players to play with school bands, and rightfully so. You don't need an electric guitar wailing over the top of every symphony. But
yeah, not even in high school. High school didn't really present any.
There was a jazz guitar option, and I took it. It was an opportunity for me to sort of explore a little more. But, again, I think playing jazz, especially as a guitar player, requires maturity I just didn't have at that time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So the premise of this show is to have my guest tell me which band they want to discuss. We're going to make a playlist. And we went through a process where I submitted 10 songs and Marshall submitted 10 songs, and he chose Van Halen for the week. And we have a stumbling block to go over in that we can't actually listen to the songs for licensing reasons on the podcast. So we have to find a way to discuss these tunes without the listener necessarily hearing them. But we're going to make a playlist at the end so you can follow along and kind of revert back or jump back and forth between. But Van Halen's the band. So why Van Halen? What's the reason for that?
So the reason is because I decided to go fully shameless on this one. I wasn't going to try and pick a band to impress anybody. Van Halen, to me, really personified what I wanted to be when I played guitar. I mean, it's a kid that's 14, 15, picking up the electric guitar. I had an issue of Guitar World that was just laying around the house. I didn't buy it. I'm sure probably my father had it. And I was leafing through it, and on one of the pages, just a full page, it was just Eddie Van Halen jumping with a guitar. And there was this 3 or 4 page expose just talking about Van Halen's career. And you can see David Lee Roth flying through the air, Michael Anthony yelling at the top of his lungs, Alex Van Halen just wailing on the drums. And I thought, man, if I could be in a band like that, that'd be great. And I wouldn't do it for the money. I do it for the kids and the
kids and stuff.
The sheer joy of bringing music to people's hearts. But that's what I wanted to do. And so, I fell in love with their music. Actually, I already knew who they were and I liked their music, but I think it was really picking that magazine up made me think, wow, this is a serious thing. I can actually do this as a job.
It's interesting because it's kind of an older band, older than you are. You're a 90s baby, right?
Yeah, I was born in 1991, which made it terribly difficult to find anybody to play music with in high school, because in high school, when I was growing up, every guitar player was being poached by a grindcore or screamo band. Basically somebody playing with atonal music because they didn't know any other tones. And so I tried to put together my own band several times, and these poor people just had so many Van Halen songs inflicted on them. It was egregious.
So do you think your dad was a big influence in the Van Halen, considering that they were kind of a 70s, early 80s popular band?
Not at all, because in fact, him and I disagreed strongly on which songs were better. So he was a total Sammy Hagar guy.
Well, welcome for some more of that.
Yeah, right. We'll be prodding into the brain of Marshall hereafter. So my dad was a big Montrose guy. He liked, Triumph, Mahogany Rush, a lot of those 70s bands that kind of were modeling the Yes dynamic, where it's a three-piece, and the guitar player is really this blues player on steroids. And Van Halen sort of grew out of that mess, so he was a fan of it, but he was such a big Montrose guy that when Sammy Hagar came around to join Van Halen, there was just no other option. He's the best singer in the world, they're the best band in the world, now they're together. I mean, David Lee Roth is great, but, Sammy Hagar's the guy. And I was all about David Lee Roth for reasons we'll dig into in a minute. But, yeah, so he really didn't bring them to my attention. He was a Jimi Hendrix, Robin Trower, Led Zeppelin guy.
Huh, okay. That's surprising. I didn't know that about you. That's an interesting... So what do you think it was that kind of kept you from gravitating towards the more 90s rock bands and focusing... If it wasn't like an older influence in your life, like a parent or some other mentor to a band that old, why wasn't it Nirvana, or why wasn't it Stone Temple Pilots? Or
Well, I think I was always drawn towards playing guitar at a high level, just put it simply. And to me, and playing an instrument is like having a superpower.
Sure.
I mean, when you sit behind a drum set, you're doing something that very few people can do. I can't do it. And when I play guitar, doing things that, may or may not be of high musical quality, but they certainly look interesting, that to me is the superpower. I'm flying at that moment.
Sure.
So I was always sort of chasing that. And there weren't a lot of bands in the 90s doing that sort of thing. Certainly there were good guitar players that came out of there. I mean, Nuno Bettencourt of Extreme is just a phenomenal guitar player, and I've loved learning his riffs, but he was still kind of born from the 80s creed, and a lot of the 90s, that shift that happened with Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, the big ones that everybody thinks about, it was so counterculture that the big guitar solos of the 80s were frowned upon. And people just weren't doing it like that anymore. It was more, they were throwing it back to the long, aching wah sounds of, like I said, Robin Trower, Jimi Hendrix, those guys.
So do you think that in hearing all that, your connection to Van Halen was really to Eddie?
Oh, certainly. I mean, and now that I listen to their music, I have a much greater appreciation for both Michael Anthony and Alex Van Halen. I've thought about that, in anticipation of this conversation, the things that I really respect about both of them. But yeah, absolutely, Eddie, totally. And as a quick departure, I would also strongly recommend to any guitar player that's interested in becoming better, watch the movie Crossroads with Ralph Macchio. The ending scene where he's playing against the devil, he's not really playing against the devil, he's playing against the devil's hired gun guitar player, who's played by Steve Vai. That's another scene that totally inspired me. Just made me want to play guitar like an absolute aficionado.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. So from this point forward, what we're going to do is we're going to count up. We both made a playlist, a personal playlist of what we did. And I'm kind of taking the role of the audience here. I don't know Van Halen nearly as much as you do. So my process was, I went to Spotify and I listened to what they considered the essential list and listened through that entire list of songs about 2 or 3 times. Maybe not to completion, but just to get a taste of those tunes.
Sure.
And I picked the 10 that jumped out at me. And I'm not going to lie, when I really reviewed your list and started listening to them, there's 2 of those songs like, man, I wish I had paid more attention to those as I did it, because when I was really studying your list to talk about them, there's a couple of those that are really pretty good tunes. I think overall we only have 2 crossovers, which is kind of interesting.
I know. I was expecting, because, you think of the Van Halen top 10, there's just a certain top 10 that comes to mind for everybody. So I thought for sure 6 or 7 even.
Yeah. So what was your process when you did this? Because we didn't give a lot of rules or a lot of expectation about what the criteria are. But what was your criteria? What did you pick your 10 songs based on?
So I thought about attacking this a few different ways. I thought about purely from a musician standpoint and what's impressive in terms of musicianship and theory. And then I kind of started to think, well, what if I was somebody just, embracing Van Halen for the first time, not just listening to, maybe the 2 or 3 songs I'd heard on the radio, but I really wanted to get a comprehensive overview. What would that look like? And I kind of went down that path for maybe the uninitiated listener. And then I also threw a little lens of Marshall in there. There are a couple songs that never make it into the greatest hits categories that I really feel ought to be there. And so that's how I made the list.
Okay. My process was kind of like, I'm familiar enough with Van Halen that I know what that signature sound is. I know what that is. And I felt like I wanted to represent the diversity of what those guys had recorded. So I tried to pick tunes that are different kinds of grooves and have different kind of time signatures and a couple of the covers. Like I kind of dug into the idea. And in my research of them, I found out that they really started out as a cover band and working in Hollywood or Pasadena, I think.
I think the name of the band that they were Mammoth at that time.
That sounds right. Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah, and they were just a cover band playing parties, playing the Whiskey A Go-Go, all that stuff. And they'd slide a few originals in there. But it wasn't until Gene Simmons actually approached them asking to make a demo record that they actually released anything original.
Oh, wow. I had no idea that Gene had anything to do with Van Halen.
He was the first one, which is kind of interesting because Guns N' Roses, the first demo they made was by Ace Frehley. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, Kiss, always looking for another cash cow.
Hey, that guy's going to market anything he can market.
Right, he's got more money than God, so he's doing something right.
So that's Gene for sure. Well, cool. So let's go ahead and start with our... I'll go first.
Yeah.
And so my number 10 song, I picked Love Walks In.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that tune as a cut?
I mean, so to me, the album 5150 that comes off of is really an extension of 1984. And this is personal. I don't have anything to back that up. But around the time 1984 came out, preceding that, the 5150 studio that was in Eddie Van Halen's home was built. And so he had all this time to start experimenting with, different tracks, layering, dubbing himself, and keyboards. And you could kind of hear that earlier in some of their first 4 albums, but it wasn't until 1984 came out and he had the time to really sit at the keyboard and perfect a keyboard part that we really hear these nuanced lines happening. And Love Walks In is one of those. So I feel like Eddie Van Halen is really not credited with being as great of a rhythm keyboard player as he is. I mean, he is just as tight with Alex as Michael is on bass.
I agree, yeah.
And so that to me is why Love Walks In is a good song. I don't want to spoil anything, but that wouldn't be on my list just because... how much do you want me to say?
Yeah, let's go dig, man. We got time.
Well, to me, it wouldn't be on my list because I feel like when Eddie Van Halen knew that Jump was a hit, he was quoted in an interview that I'd either read or heard saying, if I could just write pop songs all the time and be successful, I'd do that. And so he was chasing that. And I feel like a lot of the reason Sammy gets flack is because he was kind of riding the wave of Eddie trying to figure out, how do I write a pop hit? And the pushing of boundaries that happened with David Lee Roth, and I'll go into some of that with other of my picks, or maybe yours, I feel like that stopped happening and they became a more polished group and they were really trying to make a quality product. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just a very different sound and it's not the Van Halen we were used to. It was just so grounded and polished that I think it turned a lot of people off. And Love Comes Walking In kind of falls in that category for me. Great song. I just like my Van Halen without the polish.
Okay, that makes sense. My take, without really knowing a lot of the history of the band and the departure of Roth and Sammy Hagar coming in, I'm assuming that was a pretty dramatic in-band event.
Yeah, well, it was sort of a long time coming. There had been some disputes between really all four members of the band for a while, but David Lee Roth's drinking was getting worse. He was going on these long tirades at their live shows, and you can, if you go back and watch any of their live performances from that era, I mean, David Lee Roth has taken up 15 minutes before a song just going off about God knows what. He's worse than I am at a Grover show.
Okay,
so,
well,
yeah.
So my take was that it sounded to me, because I did enough research to kind of look at which singer was singing which songs, and they're pretty distinct. I mean, it's pretty easy to tell a Hagar tune from a David Lee Roth tune. Like they're
very different, yeah.
It's almost a different band,
it is.
Essentially.
I mean, for a couple reasons, and it's not all Hagar.
No. Yeah, I agree. But my take was, without knowing the history, was it seemed like Hagar had a more melodic singing voice. Like he was more of a singer, and Roth was more of a almost just like he could do crazy things with his voice, and it was almost another instrument more than he was singing melody.
Yeah, he's almost got like a whistling scream that you can hear in a lot of their records, especially Van Halen 1. And Sammy didn't have that. I mean, no other singer really had that, which is part of the sound. It's part of the Van Halen sound.
Sure.
And they lost that. But Sammy Hagar, to say something maybe controversial, if we're just judging on singing and hitting the correct notes at the correct times and remembering the lyrics, yeah, Sammy's the better singer. But David Lee Roth, to me, was Van Halen.
But he was also first. And that makes a big difference.
True.
I mean, they were superstars with David Lee Roth. And then drama happened, and then they turned into, this other band with this other singer and trying to continue to ride that same train, and it wasn't the same train.
It was tough. I mean, 1984 was the height of their success in a lot of ways. They had multiple Billboard charting songs that came out in 1984, and so they were trying to ride that. And I feel like Sammy Hagar was as good a choice as they could have made. He had his own great solo career. He was a fantastic singer, and he really helped keep Van Halen, give them propulsion that they needed in that time. So I'm not a hate on Sammy guy. I actually really like his stuff, and there's several of his songs in my list.
Yeah, same here. I didn't find myself strongly gravitating toward one vocalist or the other as a sort of an outside listener. Like, I'm clearly familiar with the band, but nowhere near the level you are.
Right.
So that's a lot of what I thought about that particular cut. I think it has the signature keyboard sound, which goes all the way back, and he uses it sparingly. Sometimes he'll layer it with a lot of guitar work, but sometimes he'll use a synth kind of sound or even a piano sound, and then put those blistering solos still between them. And that's just the trademark stuff. I mean, the big trademark stuff are those just blistering tapping solos,
right? A
very distinct tone. You're not going to mistake Eddie Van Halen for anyone else from a tone point of view.
Yeah, right. And I mean, how many guitar players can you really say that about? Yeah, I mean,
not a lot.
Even from a guitar player's point of view, there aren't many. Like Steve Vai, I could pick him out of a crowd.
Stevie Ray Vaughan, maybe.
Stevie Ray Vaughan,
I could pick a sound.
Yeah, because Stevie Ray Vaughan, he wasn't the first, but he really almost copyrighted the sound of the tube screamer, distortion all the way off, volume all the way up, right into a Fender cranked. And that's the Stevie sound, with a little bit of rotary, a Leslie sound on it. So, yeah, there are not so many of them that you can do that with, and Eddie's certainly one of them.
Yeah. And then the only other note I had for Love Walks In really is that out of all the tunes, to me, the reason it made my list is it's one of the only tunes that I felt like was kind of telling a story, where it's kind of a lyrics-forward song. But that goes back to your pop comment, where Eddie decided, hey, I'm going to write a bunch of pop tunes instead of a bunch of rockin' tunes. And to me, that's interesting because of the departure. And that was sort of part of my criteria for how I assembled my list. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's move on. What was your number 10?
Oh, so my number 10, let me see because I've got some notes written down here, but they're actually not in the correct order. Oh, okay. So my number 10 is Dance the Night Away. So off Van Halen 2, that was the big seller on that album. They actually wrote that apparently. I don't know how much I buy some of this, but they wrote it just because they were leaving a club one night after when they were touring Van Halen 1, and they just saw two people having sex in a truck. Is it not terribly interesting, but apparently that's why. There's just some woman dancing, and then she ended up with somebody in a truck. Who cares? But that's the story. And so the reason I like the song is because it features something you would never hear on a record today.
What's that?
So on a guitar, you can do this technique where you hold down the chord and then you actually hit it someplace on the neck. You physically hit the guitar. You like slap the strings almost. When you do that, you vibrate the strings, which allows the magnets and the pickups to actually pick up, well, the frequencies, the field really that's generated by the strings and then translated into sound. But you also end up creating harmonics that, without getting too much into the specifics of how we get those, you get these harmonics that happen and can bring out the same note but an octave higher. And if you actually follow it down the line, you can hear it a fifth higher than that and a third higher than that. It's kind of interesting. If you hit a piano key really high, you can get the same effect. So if you hit a really high up piano key, you'll hear that note, and then you'll also hear just an octave above that, and then a fifth above that, and a third above that, and it's all part of the temperament of the string. Anyway, so you can do this technique, and that's what he does in the chorus. Dance the night away, and then da 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 da. That's all tapping that he's doing on the guitar.
Okay.
And it's largely imprecise. He hits it differently in every chorus. And because it's so imprecise, you would never get away with it in a record today. But it's just so charming that they were willing to even try that, and that it was successful. So that's why I like it.
Yeah. This one, to me, I think didn't make my list because it kind of sounds like Van Halen.
Sure.
Like this is clearly a signature song. And I kind of limited my list to more the outside stuff. I wouldn't say they're like deep cuts, but things that I just felt were outside of the norm for a reason.
Right.
But
right.
certainly this is an iconic Van Halen tune. It's clear this is associated with the band at a very high level and everything else.
Yeah, the casual listener would know this. And if those are the songs you're trying to avoid, that's probably why we don't have very much crossover. Because I actually kind of tried to go down the route of this is what the casual listener should hear if they haven't already through the lens of Marshall.
Yeah, and like I said, we didn't discuss what our criteria was, and I think that both points of view are valid because what makes something essential is what's essential, the hits, the things that were successful, and what they defined as their iconic sound, or is it that they defined an iconic sound, but they also recorded these other things that demonstrate their versatility as players. Right. And that just attracted me a little bit more. But I think both roots and thoughts are great because this is clearly a virtuoso band, not just Eddie, but all five of them, really.
I mean, yeah, all five. Well, they're all fantastic. I mean, it's really Van Halen to me at the time was the greatest rhythm section around.
Yeah.
I mean, so.
And a lot of signature things that like they snuck into tunes that you just really knew, like yeah. I think that between not just Eddie's guitar tone, but Alex loves that ride cymbal bell. Oh,
it's so funny. You hear him hit that ride cymbal when he should be hitting the crash in so many tunes.
Yeah.
And I love it because
it defines that this isn't Van Halen. This is Alex playing.
It's that sound. And you hear the bell at the top of the ride being hit like when a crash should be hit sometimes. You're like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
But it is there are a lot of things that Alex does differently from other drummers, at least to me, as a non-drummer, that really define their sound.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, Dance the Night Away, when I first re-listened to this, I mean, I've heard it a million times just on the radio growing up.
I think this was another one I sort of muscled into the shades when we were doing that.
Yeah, we did play this too. Yeah, we did do this one. But for me, like hearing their recorded version of it kind of gave me Rolling Stones vibes.
Sure.
Okay. Like it kind of like this could have been a Stones cover that's reimagined.
Yeah. Okay. I could see that. Yeah. It's got a little bit of that Start Me Up meets Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Yeah.
It definitely does. It's got a driving beat to it. I mean, it's definitely designed to be a pop hit, but okay, we can move on. I don't need to get hung up on that.
Yeah, no worries. All right. So my number 9, I picked Dreams. which I think, again, is off the 5150 album.
It is. And my comments to that are going to be largely similar to Love Walks In. Again, great song. It was on the Power Rangers soundtrack, you know.
Well, I missed all that.
Right. I mean, that's enough of an endorsement. But it falls to the same criticism I would give Love Walks In.
Okay. Yeah. I also think that the guitar solo on that particular cut is, I think it's exceptional. Like the Dreams guitar solo. Yeah, it's tough when we can't listen to it.
Yeah, I know. We can't play it now, but I'd really like to listen to it again. There's so many, you know, Eddie Van Halen, beyond just, you know, trying to find a vein for that technical proficiency that he developed. There's so many key changes that happen in the bridge. Like, they really morph the song during the solos. And I just love how much thought is put into them. It's not, let's play the chorus with the solo over the top. Let's write a whole new section of the song just as an instrumental showcase.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, that they were playing with sometimes time signatures, certainly with key changes.
Right.
And arranging things with kind of weird phrasing, like surprisingly weird phrasing.
There are a couple like that where if you're sitting there actually trying to count along with Alex, you're a little thrown off.
I agree. There's a couple times I had to re-listen to things, even just doing notes, and like, was that a 7/4 measure, or did he just sort of hide the one and, you know, it's really all in four?
And
you
it's
know?
interesting. I think Eddie is oftentimes feeling his way through the solo. Like, he kind of just starts writing this solo and is like, this isn't part of the song yet. And he feels his way to the end of this phrase, and that's a half measure, but the phrase is done, so we're just going to start on a new measure here. There are a couple songs like that, and I don't want to spoil it yet, because
we got a lot of room to go. It reminds me a little bit of when you and I did the Jimmy Buffett thing with our buddy Tim Fay. Remember Tim?
Oh, yeah.
And you know, shout out to Tim if he's out there listening. But anyway, Jimmy Buffett seems like it should be a real simple, easy gig, and it's not.
No, not at all. There's so many hidden little gems in there, and they're simple guitar riffs, but if you get them wrong, you've ruined the song.
Yeah, it's like they need that 2/4 measure has to be there, and they're goofy, and sometimes they're like 8-bar phrases, and then you get like 12-bar choruses, and they doesn't seem like it should work, but it just flows.
Right, for a guy that's all about frat boys, you know, eating cheeseburgers in paradise, it's surprisingly complex music.
Yeah, and so the comparison is I feel like Van Halen was also very much like this. It kind of seems like it could be lowbrow rock, but it's not. Yeah,
well, or highbrow rock. I mean, really, yeah. Some of the phrasing in those songs, if you're paying attention, it's easy to get lost. And again, I don't want to spoil anything because there are a few highlights.
All right, well, yeah, let's move on then. Okay. So your number 9 is I have it is Finish What You Started.
Oh yeah, so this is a fun Sammy one. Finish What You Started. I always find it charming when a band kind of takes a departure into a different genre. And a lot of people feel like this is Van Halen trying to go country. To me, it's not really them going country. It's just a rock riff played clean, which is, you know, charming and enjoyable in itself. But that's not the star of this song. The star of this song is Alex.
I agree.
The syncopation that's happening, it's so phenomenal. And what really defines it for me is the snare. So the snare sound of Alex is one of the most unique snare sounds I think I've heard in rock, and it defines Van Halen as much as Eddie's playing does. The Brown sound is a term that's thrown around a lot by guitar players to describe Eddie's guitar tone.
Right.
That's not what it is. David Lee Roth coined the term to describe Alex's snare. So Alex's snare has a popping sound, and it shelves off a lot of high end. I don't know how he does it, but it's not a crack, it's a pop. And it's this very signature sound that I've never heard on any other snare. And, you know, now maybe everybody refers to Eddie's tone as the Brown sound and it's taken on a new meaning. But originally, that was to describe Alex's drumming. And the timbre of his drums combined with really what is a showcase of his ability to syncopate everything and just keep in the pocket in a way that you could explain far better than me, I just found wonderful. That's why I go back to that song.
So same. I went through your list and heard that and remembered it. Like, for whatever reason, it either didn't make the Spotify list or I just slipped my mind as I was compiling my list. And as soon as I heard that syncopated entrance, I just said, "Oh, I made a mistake.
Yeah,
this should have been on my list,
it's so
100%."
good.
And you know, like one of my drumming idols is Carter Beauford.
Oh yeah,
And for many, many years, Carter used Alex's signature snare drum.
no way.
So it's a Rosewood, Alex Van Halen's signature snare drum.
Oh, I had
and
no
I
idea.
think now which company makes it is a challenge.
I have no
I think
idea.
it's a Yamaha, but I know it was the Alex Van Halen signature Rosewood snare drum, and that's the snare drum Carter used for many years.
Wow. I never
And maybe
knew.
he's still using it. I haven't kept up on what his gear is lately, but for at least a dozen years, that was he was trying to copy the Alex Van Halen snare drum sound for the Dave Matthews Band.
Do you know how many records he might have used that on? Like, did he use it on like Before These Crowded Streets?
Probably that's still too early. I would bet it's from like Every Day Forward.
Okay.
Yeah. I think he was still using the Yamaha Recording Custom aluminum or steel or whatever, the metal snare drum that's sort of stock. I think he was using that snare drum on the first couple albums, and about the fourth or fifth album is when he switched to the wood snare drum. But I remember specifically noticing it and seeing it when I would see them live. And it's this beautiful snare, and I didn't know what it was, so that's what prompted me to look it up. And I remember it was Alex's signature snare drum.
Right. Oh,
So,
that's awesome.
Interesting little connection there.
I'll have to go back and listen to that every day. Huh.
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to say about this one. It's still in that classic vein. It's certainly a defining tune, and but the syncopated groove is pretty unique among all their recordings.
There's not another one that's really like that to me, and that's why I come back to it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a miss on my list. All right, so that puts me at number 8.
Okay.
All right, Take Your Whiskey Home.
This one almost made my list.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah. So this has been a favorite of mine for a long time, and I don't want to step on you if you have something you want to say.
No, go ahead, man.
So I love this song. I love the bluesy acoustic riff that leads into that big, full electric, full band sound. The reason it didn't make my list, bless his heart, I'm trying to remember who was mixing this particular album, because this is off Women and Children First. Ted Templeman produced it, and gosh, I can't remember who mixed it. But when the full band comes in, it's like a full decibel or two too low. It needs to be louder. And it's like the same way I get frustrated by the song Vertigo by U2. It's an immaculate song. But when the bridge kicks in, theirs is a decibel too high. So the dynamic range is lost. And that's why Take Your Whiskey Home was always frustrating to me, because it's one of my favorite songs. But dynamically, the acoustics should have been just a little bit lower. But great playing by everybody, and a great showcase for David, too.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is just a musical departure to be a more bluesy kind of thing. It still kind of comes back and kicks in with the whole band eventually. But another signature thing that I've noticed is their mixing. You're right, is that dynamic mixing. We don't get that so much in music these days, where we get
Everything's compressed.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. It's so frustrating that poor drummers get the brunt of this, because now drums, the whole point of drums, instead of to propel you into sort of a different world, it's to make you move and to make you dance. So the drums have to be
gated and compressed,
because they're the backbeat for the whole other band, so that the band can be brought down when the kick drum comes in, and you can get that propulsion in a song. And there's just so much that's lost in a song when you give up dynamic range.
Yeah, I agree. And drum tone, like just like looking at more modern recordings, we don't want drums to ring and have their tone, which makes, having nice birch drums or maple drums and oak drums and all the different sound qualities we can get out of beautiful drums. And we kind of turn them into MIDI files.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, everybody's trying to turn your snare into another 808, and the 808's awesome. I mean, there's some great pop tunes, but there's a lot of that ringing of the snare and toms too. Alex's toms, which are another thing I'll talk about in another song. He
was a Tama drum player, is that right? Do you remember?
To be honest with you, I don't remember. I feel like I watched them. I had the old DVD Live Without a Net, and I looked like he was playing like orchestral toms or something. They were huge. He had a huge kit.
Right. Seems like when I was doing the research that he was a Tama guy, or maybe that wasn't for his whole career, but for a lot of it. But I don't think that snare drum was a Tama snare drum that Carter was using, so I don't know. Anyway, moving on. That was my 8, so puts us at your 8. Which is Big Bad Bill.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Big Bad Bill is Sweet William Now. So, yeah, this one was originally written by Jack Yellen in 1924. Now, I think David Lee Roth brought this to the table because David Lee Roth is a big fan of music that precedes his time. And you can see that in his solo career. He was covering Frank Sinatra, the Beach Boys. He did Tobacco Road on Eat 'Em and Smile. So he was a big fan of kind of throwing back to a different time. And, I like it because of that. I also like it because it's, again, a departure. It shows their versatility as a band. I mean, they're playing a completely different genre.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you call that genre, listening to it?
Like vaudeville or...
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of it's brushes on a snare drum and a clarinet. Like this is not what I expected to hear at all. I didn't know this song existed.
And I didn't even know what guitar Eddie's using on that because it's certainly not his Kramer. Like, it's not a Fender, it's not a Gibson. It's such a full sound. I'm sure he must have had some hollow body sitting in the studio because it's a completely different sound. You would never think it's Eddie, which is actually part of the charm of the song, is that he was able to go that far out of his range.
Yeah.
But none of those reasons are my number one reason for liking the song.
Okay, so what is?
So my number one reason, if you ask anybody how many Van Halens are in Van Halen, they'll say 2, Eddie and Alex. And then people that have kept up with them say 3 because Wolfgang, Eddie's son, replaced poor Michael for a while. But people that really know Van Halen know that there's a 4th Van Halen that entered the repertoire, and that was their father, Jan. And Jan was a clarinet player. And he'd been playing his whole life, and that's him playing on that song. And the clarinet solo on that song is phenomenal.
Yeah, I had no idea.
So they had their dad play on that song, and it's really the full family band at that point. It's fantastic. It's one of the best arranged songs they have, frankly.
Yeah, and it's just so far out of the box, and again, really showcases that...
Sorry.
Uh-oh, you killed it. Oops. But it just showcases that sometimes... musicians that get known for a thing. One of my pet peeves is when people ask me, what do you do? I play drums, I do this, and what kind of music do you play?
Sure.
That's just a trigger question for me. It looks like you're shaking your head like it is for you too.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't play a kind of music, I play music. And this kind of showcases my point, where you got a band that's really noted for being a Whiskey A Go-Go LA cover band, shredding guitar, tapping, David Lee Roth screeching, and great control. And then you get a song like this out of them. And you go, what else could these guys have done?
Yeah.
Really. And not to say they should have. I mean, they made the money they made. They had great lives and great careers and all that, but sometimes you got to consider that the person painting the portrait and the person playing the guitar, what you consume at the end of that is only a fraction of what they know and are able to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that's a little underappreciated and just misunderstood about artists in general. Not just musicians, but all artists, because there's a product at the end for most of us.
Sure.
And the amount of effort that it took to get there is, it's you don't see it.
Right. He didn't grow up practicing Van Halen tunes.
Exactly.
I didn't grow up learning Grover's material.
Exactly.
You gotta have a breadth beneath you that allows you to play in a certain range. And I'm still working on that. I mean, I think every musician is, but I know for sure I am, and I know the ways that I am because, yeah, I'm a guitar player. What kind of music do I play? Well, I know my wheelhouse, but it's more fun when I can get out of it.
That makes sense. All right, my number 7 was Best of Both Worlds.
Yeah.
Again, I think this is 5150, right?
It is. It's a great album.
And now this song in particular, when I was doing research, I got to the chorus and heard the harmony singing, like, well, this is great. Now it's Roth and Hagar together? Is that the deal?
No. That I would be astounded if that was the case.
So I couldn't find a clear answer. And when I was looking it up, because there's a harmony part that happens in the chorus of this, and like when I said, I was trying to research, and when you're researching stuff like this, it's Wikipedia and AI,
Wikipedia,
so you never know how accurate.
Reddit, you never know.
Right. But it sounded like either they had done something together, or it was a song that was written before and they already had tracks of Roth singing it.
I wouldn't be surprised, because there are tracks that they recorded years later that were brought to the table, back in like 1981.
I wonder if that turned into drama, though, using those tracks.
I don't know that.
Well, at some
That'd be
point,
interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe because you've got better ears for this kind of stuff than I do, but it certainly sounds to me like it is Hagar and Roth singing the harmony parts together in the chorus.
Man, I desperately want to listen to this now. It's such a shame we can't play it.
We can't play it, but we could take a break.
Yeah, well, I would really be interested in listening to this, because Michael Anthony is also... he was as good a singer as Roth, easily. He sang, and I think the band he came from before Van Halen was called like Red Ball Jets or something, and he was the lead singer.
Okay.
So he had the timbre to be able to be a front man, but he just wanted to be a bass player, fair enough. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was Michael. I would really like to listen to it. If we're allowed to pause. Yeah,
we're going to take a break, and maybe I'll throw a commercial in here, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, and we're back. And I think we've decided that maybe it's urban myth, my little research here, that...
Yeah, as the resident Van Halen expert in a room of two, I'm going to say that's probably Michael Anthony.
Okay. Yeah. You want to adjust? We'll just give Marshall a quick little mic adjustment here.
I don't want this to fall over. All right, good enough. I'm not touching it anymore.
All right.
Okay, so that was your 7?
That was my 7, yeah.
Okay, so my 7 is also off the 51. This album's getting a lot of play.
So do you think that's their strongest album? Do you think that I picked things off of...
I don't think it's their very strongest album, but I would say it's... If you held my feet to the fire and I had to rank them, I'd probably put that as number 3.
Okay. But your number 7 is not off that album. Your number 7 is
isn't it?
Panama.
Let me see here.
Unless I made a mistake in compiling the list here.
Oh, no. Well, yeah, I was kind of wrestling with that a little bit. All right. I tell you what, I'm actually good with Panama there. Yeah, I was still wrestling with that list leading up to this, but I'll leave Panama there. So Panama, everybody knows it. Great song, great riff. A lot of the charm for me in this song is that it came about when Van Halen was touring with AC/DC.
Okay.
And Eddie Van Halen was quoted saying, AC/DC's basically only playing one song, but it's a great song.
Right.
And so this is him trying to do the same thing. He's basically trying to write an AC/DC song, and wouldn't you know, of course, it's a hit. It's like their second most popular song. So, yeah, I love it for that. I love it that he really hit the nail on the head with the rock sound. But at this point, Ted Templeman has been producing 5 of their records, and he's really got it dialed in at this point. And also, like I said at the beginning, this is when 5150 Studios get established in Eddie's home.
Okay.
So they've got all that time to play with it, to try and really dial the sound in, but they're still keeping a live feel to it. There's not a bunch of overdubs. There's still... So the Ted Templeman sound in Van Halen, again, a big part of the Van Halen records is they tried to make it sound live.
Okay.
That's always my preference. When I'm listening to a band, I prefer the live sound. When I listen to our Grover stuff, the stuff I gravitate towards is the live stuff.
I agree.
If I'm going to listen to it.
If I had to pick a favorite album, it's going to be the Harvard Mixer of all.
Right. It's a great album, and it's just so authentic. And again, I think part of it comes down to there's not a bunch of overdubbing, there's not a bunch of compression. It's just honest. And there's an honest sound with Van Halen that comes about because Ted Templeman wanted to keep the live feel. And so you've got, on the records he produced, electric guitar all the way in the left speaker, bass all the way in the right speaker, drums right down the center. And so it gives this huge stereo spread to what is a very simple setup. And they kept that with Panama. And I don't know what the magic is that made this like so much fuller than the previous albums. It might be the fact that Eddie Van Halen was just playing around in his studio and figured out, oh, if I hook these two amps up together, I get that much richer of a sound. But they really perfected it, I feel like, on that album, and especially in this song.
Yeah, you know, a little bit of a spoiler. I mean, this is our first crossover, and I put it even higher on my list. I don't want to talk about it a lot more now. I mean, we can talk about it a little more later, but I just think this is the quintessential Van Halen tune to me. This is the song that's Van Halen more than any of the others. I mean, you said it's the second most popular, and I don't know about the popularity and which one was the hits and which one spent longer on charts and all that kind of stuff. But this is the song that jumps in my mind when I think about what Van Halen was. It is, you know, it's.
Yeah, and that's why I started with kind of hemming and hawing over where this is on my list, because I agree. I mean, it's their sound articulated as well as they could have.
Yeah, and every little element, all the signature stuff. I mean, when I start to get into the covers that I chose later on here in my list, but that's the interesting thing is like each member had this little thing that they did. I mean, Eddie's tone is there, the tapping stuff, the ride bell, the screeching, the controlled in pitch screeching. Like, I don't know anyone that really has got that kind of vocal control to make those kinds of sounds and control it like David Lee Roth.
Yeah, and again, a part of their sound, because I can't think of any other singer now or from that era that was doing that.
Yeah.
Could do it.
I mean, some guys tried. I think Axl Rose kind of tried to emulate some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, Axl Rose certainly developed his own very iconic sound. Vince Neil from Motley Crue really tried for that sound. I mean, they even tried for the look. 3 guys with brown hair and the lead singer has blonde hair, you know?
Yeah,
How much more can you try and copy him?
Yeah. You know, and then I think there's an element of, well, I don't know. I was thinking like of Steve Perry from Journey.
Sure.
Having just a great male vocal control in that particular genre. But nobody could do it at the extreme levels of Roth.
Yeah. And I think extreme definitely is the word you would put on Roth for those first 4 to 5 albums.
Yeah. And then his character, like he was also, you know, one of the things that I didn't plan on talking about, but one of the things that's true about you is you're a very different person. Like for people that might be listening to this and expecting Marshall from Grover's band and getting a conversation that's
right.
Much more cerebral.
Not
here.
Alcohol fueled.
Well, yeah, right. But there's a certain amount of characterization that I think we all do as performers, that we're musicians first, but there's also an element of performing when we go do what we do. And I think Roth, you know, I think he was probably a pretty party hungry guy too, but I think that he developed a character that really worked for that band, and it supported his musical performance.
I agree. Well, I agree to an extent, because David Lee Roth, he said he struggled with hardcore ADHD when he was younger, so I'm sure that bled through into his persona as he grew up. But yeah, definitely party hungry. I mean, he had paternity insurance, for God's sake. So yeah, I mean, it was a persona, and it was him. Again, part of the charm is that it's authentic. But yeah, like for me, for example, yeah, I absolutely bring somebody that's largely different to the stage. I mean, a perfect example of this is Eddie Murphy. If you ever watch Eddie Murphy in an interview, he's nothing like Dr. Dolittle. I mean, that guy is about as reserved as you get.
Sure.
So for me, a lot of that, it's funny in listening to these songs, thinking about David Lee Roth, I thought, I really do take a lot from the David Lee Roth, and then I sprinkle in a little Reggie Watts. And that's a lot of what kind of the Marshall show is when I get the spotlight.
Yeah. And I think it really works. And it's always just fun to make Grover as uncomfortable as possible on stage. I mean, that's part of our personal goal.
Right. I don't care if the audience just looks at me in disgust. As long as Grover is just repulsed and wanting to hide under a rock, I'm happy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm just glad I finally get a microphone. He banned one for me for the last 10 years.
He did. Well, you know, I mean,
I did earn it. But
yeah. You can only go R-rated at a kid's party so many times.
All right, so that puts me at number 6, if I'm remembering the math here. So Dancing in the Street. So we're at the first cover.
Okay.
So my research, this is a Marvin Gaye tune.
I thought this was a Martha Reeves and the Vandellas tune.
That's who recorded it, but he wrote it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then before Van Halen got a hold of it, Mamas and the Papas had recorded it, and Grateful Dead had done it, and David Bowie and...
Oh, I thought they did it after.
The David Bowie one?
Well, yeah, because I think they did it, I don't remember the year, but they recorded this like 1982.
Oh, maybe the David Bowie and Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
David Bowie, Mick Jagger. Right.
Mick Jagger, man, brain fart.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So there's just tons of different versions of this tune.
Right.
And for me, the immediate draw is, I don't know if you're old enough to remember Knight Rider. Do you remember the...
I only know it from stereotypical images of David Hasselhoff doing his thing.
Okay. Well, the theme song to Knight Rider, when I'm like a, whatever I was, 5 or 6 year old boy, and this is what's on TV when you get home from school after cartoons. It was just a super iconic theme song about this talking car, and it's great. But the intro like really is reminiscent of the theme song from Knight Rider. So it's like this weird nostalgia connection to me. But I also just think that the tune overall is a tune that's been recorded by just very different artists that all brought a unique thing to the song. And Van Halen, I think, gave the song its due justice. I think it's a great performance of the tune, but they still managed to put the signature Van Halen stuff in it, so it's unmistakably Van Halen.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And to me, there's a real talent to that, to like take a cover tune and have it be an honest version of the source material, and still sprinkle in your little Easter egg, so to speak, and it still all works.
Yeah. For me, the standout in that tune, looking at it from that perspective, because that one didn't make my list, I'll just say. Probably just because I don't go back to the well very often for that one. But the way they approach their guitar solo, and especially Michael Anthony's vocals in the chorus, that's so signature Van Halen that, yeah, I can see why that made your list. And it's a great tune, yeah. So many people have covered it. I really like the Martha Reeves version. Honestly, that might be my favorite version of the song.
Mine's probably the Mama and the Papa version.
Sure.
But again, it's this kind of stuff that my parents were listening to when I was growing up, was those vinyl albums. But I mean, it's a great tune. And then more recently, I was involved with the Pub is Dead band and was reintroduced to the Grateful Dead version of Dancing in the Street.
I mean, I'm not surprised they did a cover. I just never heard it.
Yeah. It's a Grateful Dead version. It goes on for a long time.
Right, it's 2 hours long.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a lot of fun, and I just think that again, it goes back to showcasing these band members' versatility of taking a tune that's not something they wrote and still making it sound like it's them without sort of reinventing the wheel of what the tune was.
Yeah.
That's a tough balance, and it shows a high level of musicianship, in my opinion.
I'm trying to remember the keyboard he used for that. Well, a quick bit on the Knight Rider thing. So David Hasselhoff, connection to Van Halen there.
Oh, okay.
So David Hasselhoff, he's got a singing career. And so there was this album that was really being pushed big time. This is David Hasselhoff's big release. He's going to be a star. And they released the album on the day that OJ is getting chased in his Bronco.
Oh, no,
and
really?
So nobody cares about his album anymore. It completely tanks. He's actually released a lot of albums since, and he's kind of big in Germany. But basically, Hasselhoff's musical career is the real victim of OJ's atrocities, or not atrocities. And actually, I don't really think this relates to Van Halen.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's an interesting story.
Yeah. I was really selling it there for a second.
Well, OJ just recently passed. That's probably what the connection is.
There you go.
All right. So your number 6. We're finally to your cut from the 5150 album, which is
5150.
All right.
The eponymous song. So, yeah. This song never makes it into any of the best of tracks. You'll never hear it on This Is Van Halen and none of that. I really like this song because the chord structure, I don't think anybody intended for this to happen, but it steals from John Williams all over the place. And, everybody loves John Williams as a composer, but they hit all these big add nine chords that just, to me, when you hear an add nine chord, and for those that don't know, basically you're reaching for the second above the major chord. It gives you so much hope. And on top of that, they use the classic John Williams sound, which is it's really the love theme from Superman, where you have the one chord, and then you keep the one root in the bass, and then you throw the two chord on top of it, but it's in a major format. And you just go back and forth between those two, and it just makes you feel like you're lifting off. If you listen to the pre-chorus, and this is my favorite part of the whole song, the pre-chorus, not even the chorus. If you listen to that, they're building up just with those two chords, and Michael Anthony's backup vocals just go higher and higher and higher. And that's why I'm almost certain that he's the one singing Best of Both Worlds, because you can hear him go so high, and there's no auto-tune.
Sure.
He's doing that all naturally. And I don't know, that just floored me when I heard it. And this is another one of those tunes that I inflicted on my poor bandmates in high school. Just, you have to learn this song. It's so good. And none of us could sing it, but...
Yeah, it was an interesting one because when I listened to it, it didn't jump out at me as a hit. But then I kind of re-listened to it and like, wow, this is pretty high on Marshall's list. I mean, there must be something here I'm missing. Yeah. And upon re-listening, then I got just the musical complexity. There's a lot of like groove changes. They're like going to go to a halftime and then to a double time. Well, not double time, but they just go from one section ends up being a halftime drum groove. And they kind of seamlessly go back in and out of that.
I'm playing the song in my head right now, trying to think of it.
The challenge of this. But anyway, that was the biggest thing I noticed is that it's a pretty seamless like groove transition.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the bridge now, where again he's hitting that ride, and you can just hear the bell coming through every time. Yeah, I'll have to listen to it again with the groove changes in mind, because to me it's all about those big bright major chords that they're making modal shifts all over the place to make it happen, and that's what keeps a very driving rock song sound like you're flying, is because they're just using these big bright full add nine chords all over the place. I don't know, it's a hopeful sound. I've always liked that sound.
Okay, yeah, that's great. All right, so my number 5, and I'm kind of surprised that this didn't make your list. Like, I'm just surprised, and I put down Eruption.
Sure.
To me, this is just the maybe there's more, but this is just a clear showcase of the virtuosity of Eddie. I don't know that there's anyone else who ever could have played that as cleanly as he did. I mean, I'm sure that now you've heard it, people can emulate it and get it, but to design basically a song that's a guitar solo that has structure and everything else to it, it's on par with like Steve Vai and Satriani kind of stuff,
Yeah. I can see the argument. For me, so yes, Eruption's great. Spanish Fly is great. The intro to Mean Streets. I mean, all of these instrumentals that Eddie did, they're all creative and brought something new to the table. When you watch Casablanca now, you forget the importance of the line, "Here's looking at you, kid," because everybody knows that line.
Sure.
Every movie, not every movie, but it's been reused so many times.
Yeah, it's almost like a cliche at this point.
Right. And so that's how I feel about a lot of Eruption at this point. And again, that's from the perspective of a guitar player, because I've heard so many guitar players play it. I actually didn't include any of Eddie's instrumentals on my list, just to spoil a little of that. Not that it wasn't amazing. That was something that Eddie had been working on in sound checks for a while. And again, I think that's just something he started playing in the studio, and Ted Templeton was like, yeah, just let's record it. Let's do it. And my favorite part of it isn't really even the playing, because from a guitar player's point of view, what he's playing in this day and age is accomplishable. It's not out of the reach of any guitar player that has access to YouTube and free tablature that can tell you how to play anything under the sun. The thing that makes it great is the slow phase that he put on his guitar that no other guitar player could ever pull off like him. There's a phase sound that you can get from an MXR phaser. It's just a simple pedal, and he would just turn it on about the lowest setting, I think, and it's just this slow wash that happens, and it's on all the time. you never really notice it because he's playing syncopated riffs and
it happens so slowly.
Right. And it's like he's got a lot of staccato playing happening in his normal lines. But in that, when he's playing a billion notes strung together, you can hear this slow phase happening through all of it.
Okay.
And it kind of gives glue to the whole thing. It just makes it a little more cohesive and shows off just how creative he was willing to be with not just his playing, but also his tone. So I think that's why I like the song.
That makes sense. Yeah, I just thought an instrumental thing was interesting and a little out of the box, and that's the one I heard, and I thought it was just,
it is.
fantastic.
I mean, if you have to pick one, that's the one.
Okay, well, I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
So that puts us at number 5 for you, which is Little Guitars, and this is the second one of your picks. That man, I regret not giving this a second listen before making this would have made my list.
Yeah,
this song is great.
So this is another one. Actually, it's preceded by Spanish Fly, which is another instrumental on Diver Down, and it's done all acoustic, and it's Eddie basically trying to do flamenco through his hands. But Little Guitars is interesting because if you listen to the record, it sounds different from the others, especially the tone on the guitar. It's shrill, and it's not always very pleasant. And the reason is because somebody actually gifted Eddie a small junior-sized Gibson that's about half the size of a normal Les Paul. So it's almost like a ukulele.
So is a Les Paul Jr. just...
No, it's like a novelty guitar.
Oh, okay.
So it's the size of a ukulele, but it's fully electric. It's totally playable. And he thought, well, let's actually try to record a song with it. And he did. This is the song he recorded with it. And I think there's only one video of them playing this live, at least that I could find. But he plays it live. He brings it around with him. And that's why it's got such a shrill sound compared to his other songs.
Okay.
But the chords in it generally, I really enjoy. And this is another one where there's syncopation happening all over the place. And that's why I like it, is because the chord choices are nice. And it's just beautifully melodically sung by David Lee Roth. It's not an aggressive sound for him.
Yeah, it's one of the songs that's another reason I liked it, was that it's one of the songs where Roth's really singing.
It's almost a ballad. Like he almost approaches it like a ballad because he is actually singing to a woman in a sense, which he's doing in a lot of songs, but it's sweetly, not, sexually.
Right.
So it's different for them in a couple different ways. But as a whole piece, this is one I come back to a lot.
Yeah, I think I missed the bus on this particular cut. I don't know what I would have bumped, but...
Yeah, well, you would never find it on any greatest hits or This Is playlist. It just never makes it.
Oh, so I really might have just missed it in my research.
It wouldn't have been there.
Wow,
I'm
okay.
almost certain it isn't.
What an interesting miss then for like the community at large, because it really is just a fantastic cut.
It is, and it wasn't a hit on Diver Down. I think Diver Down, the number one song on there was Pretty Woman.
Okay,
it wasn't even one of their originals. So
interesting. All right, that puts me at number 4. Which, interestingly enough, is Pretty Woman.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
But I don't have a lot more to say about it. It's sort of the same. It's the same reasons that I had chosen Dancing in the Streets. It's the same kind of thing. I felt like this is clearly that song. They didn't reinvent the wheel, but they were still able to give the song an update for the era and still sprinkle in all that signature Van Halen sound without losing the source material.
Yeah. So again, for me, my critique of this is going to be pretty specific from a guitar player's perspective. I feel like that tonal stuff that I was so happy about before with Eddie Van Halen doesn't play nicely on certain ranges of the guitar. So when he's holding chords, power chords, and hitting low notes, hitting exceptionally high notes, there's a certain part of the neck where that tone flourishes, and he keeps hitting the 2 upper strings with aggression in that song, like all over the place. Instead of going da 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 da, he goes da na da na 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 na, and even during the singing parts, it's da na na na, and that na part is him hitting those open strings again. And to me, I love the tone that he figured out, but it just doesn't play nicely on those open strings.
Okay.
It's a very specific complaint.
Yeah. Yeah. And I certainly can see that, since I kind of like am regretting at least 2 of your picks not being on mine, that one of the two covers that I picked. I don't think that Van Halen is known to be a cover band, and having picked, I mean, did they do any more than those two? Did I pick like the only two covers?
Well, I mean, Ice Cream Man.
Oh, well, yeah, okay.
I mean, there's that one. You've got boy, going from memory here. My brain's failing me because I actually can't remember a lot of other covers that they did.
Yeah. Well, anyway, my point was I don't think they did a lot of covers in general, and I put two on the list. So I think one of them certainly can be bumped as we get to the final process of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to your number 4. Everybody Wants Some.
So this is standing in for some Van Halen tunes. I guess all the Van Halen tunes to me, where David Lee Roth is just going balls to the wall and bumping into the rails, and nobody seems to care. So another great example of this would be Unchained. You know,
okay.
He's just kind of screaming at the top of his lungs. There's an ad lib where he screws with the producer midway through the song, and they just keep it. If you listen to the song intentionally, you'll hear in the third verse David Lee Roth is supposed to say, "I've seen a lot of people that are looking for a moonbeam." But he's so hyped up, he just forgets and goes, "I seen a lot of leaker looking for a moo beep." And they keep it. And he does that stuff all the time. And I think it's that charm of being willing to bump up against the edges and just have more energy than polish is what made the David Lee Roth era so enjoyable.
Yeah, and this was a hit tune, right? I mean, even with
it, I don't know if it even charted, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember if it did. I don't think it charted. But to me, it's one of my favorites. It's just so much aggression and testosterone, and beyond that, Alex's toms on that are stellar. I don't know what he's using for toms. I don't know if it's the toms. I don't know if he's using concert toms, whatever. But they're big and thunderous, and that's. David and Alex are the big stars in that song. Eddie's playing is fine. He's actually using the same riff in that song as he used in Finish What You Started. If you listen to it, it's actually it's not the syncopated part, but the part where Sammy's singing and Finish What You Started. Same riff.
Huh.
And he's just got a bunch of distortion on it. And it's a fine riff. It works. But it's really a vehicle for Alex and David to just go nuts.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to give that one a re-listen too. Yeah. What a interesting takes for that. All right, so that puts me at number 3. So my number 3 is Ice Cream Man.
Oh, okay.
And straight up, this made my list because we played it.
Sure.
This is a tune that I don't know that I ever remember really hearing before or anything, but when we did it, it was so much fun to let you do this song.
Yeah.
And it's just high energy. Like it turns from this bluesy thing into this really aggressive shuffle.
It's just an obscenely aggressive 12-bar blues.
Yeah.
It's a great song. I've always liked this. For me, that song, it's interesting. I think, so David Lee Roth claims he played guitar in the beginning on that song. And I buy it because it's not a particularly nuanced guitar part. It's literally just thumb on the bottom string, finger on the top string going back and forth like this. And he did play it live, so there's a chance. I mean, if I've got a bet on a horse in the recording studio, I'd rather be Eddie than David. But, David claims he played it. But David played that song for years before he joined up with Van Halen. It was just one of his favorites to play.
Okay.
And again, Gene Simmons, recording the first demo for Van Halen, was adamant. That song cannot be on the demo. This is an awful song. I don't know why anybody would cover it. And they fought him on it. And thank God they did. This is a great song.
Yeah, it's a great tune. It's a little outside their box from being the hard rock kind of genre to be a little bit more bluesy and but yeah, what a good cut, and everything about it's just enjoyable. It's fun.
Right.
It's a hoot to play.
It is. It's so much fun to play. I mean, and that's another one of the reasons that I like it is it's so easy to pull off live because you say, hey, we're doing a 12-bar blues shuffle in E. Give me all the energy you got. And I could stand up there and I can sing it if I want. And because the whole point of it is to give the audience as much energy and innuendo as possible, it doesn't matter if I don't hit the high notes. I'll never hit them. But the audience gets what they paid for.
Exactly. All right. Well, your number 3 is Running with the Devil.
So I was fortunate in that I, like so much of the rest of the world, Running with the Devil was how I first heard Van Halen.
Okay.
So this is the first song off their first album. And the fun trivia fact is that at the beginning of the song, that sound is Alex Van Halen's car horn in reverse. A lot of people know that, but that's the sound. So I heard it actually because, I was born in 1991. I think I was like 11 or something, and I was playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City. And this song came on in the game, and I thought, who the hell is that? That's one of the best sounds I've ever heard in my life.
Huh.
And that began my love of Van Halen. So the vocals in it are great. I mean, it's like Beach Boys level vocals where they're all perfectly put together. They've got this tight rhythm section. All these things that I've been kind of espousing all the time were the things that drew me in from the very beginning. It was just a full ensemble that sounded so great in a rock format. And that guitar sound of Eddie Van Halen's, when I was complaining earlier that it didn't work on a certain part of the neck, it works here. And it just showcases the tone absolutely, because he hits a chord, lets it ring, pulls it up, hits it, lets it ring again, lets it ring again. And the reason he can get away with that is because he was taking an old super lead that was cranked up to 11. He'd turn it up so loud to get the sound, he actually had to turn it around at the clubs.
Oh, wow.
So he would crank it all the way up. And what happens when you do that to an amp is that the rectifier inside the amp, the thing that's taking the AC signal and in so many words, is turning it into DC. It's basically flipping the negative signal upside down. So instead of having a big sine wave, you just have hills, right? And then it's being sent through a bunch of filter capacitors to try and smooth out the sound. When you turn that all the way up, you've just got the valves inside the amplifier begging for more electrons. And what's happening is every time you hit a chord, it doesn't sound any different at 10 than it did at 6, but it feels different, and the chords sustain, and they'll last as long as you want them to because you just have a flood of electrons coming at you. And that's the sound of Running with the Devil. The guitar is turned up to 11, the chords are sustaining, the whole band is in unison.
Nice. Yeah, I another one of the tunes. It's kind of like Panama to me. Like, this is one of the Van Halen tunes.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, just kind of trucking right along here. My number 2, Hot for Teacher. As a drummer, I couldn't ignore the intro to this song and not make the list.
I know, it's great.
No, that had to be done with overdubbing, right? That nobody. Or did they?
No, I'm almost certain they overdubbed that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm almost certain they put a piece of paper on the kick drum and just went for it, I think.
So how do they pull that off live? Did you ever see him live? Did you get to do that in your life?
I know. So I did see him live, and I saw him with David, no less. Wolfgang was playing bass, but it was, it was still a good show. I was still happy to see him. I don't remember being disappointed by that, but it's. If I told you I remember the specifics of the kick drum intro, I'd be lying. All I know is that when I listen to that song, it can't possibly be one guy playing the kick drum. I mean, he's hitting it like on top of other hits. It feels like when the beginning.
Yeah.
Long.
And I mean, I've heard, I don't remember, but just like in the sort of, mythology of stuff, that they were trying to make it sound like a motorcycle engine.
Oh, is that right?
They were trying to get like that, like a Harley kind of sound out of the bass drums. And I think that like, well, that makes sense if that's what they were going for. It certainly,
it certainly has the rumble of that.
Yeah. And then just generally, I like the innuendo and playfulness of the tune. Like it's a fun tune.
And so to me, that's in my list. Everybody Wants Some is accounting for the Hot for Teachers, and it's accounting for it. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but any song where Dave is just kind of speaking to the audience rather than singing to them.
Sure.
And I mean, again, you listen to his affinity for older music. I think a lot of his love of the Rat Pack really shines through when he does stuff like that. He's willing to just talk to the audience midway through the song. A fun little fact on that song. So again, this is on the 1984 album when Eddie establishes his own studio. And one of the things he was playing with was trying to double that guitar riff in the beginning on bass.
Okay.
And it took him forever to do. And he finally got it down. And it sounded like shit. So they had to trash it, which, I mean, I'm sure Michael Anthony was thankful for, because I don't even want to imagine what that's like to play on bass. It's a huge spread on your hands on guitar. I don't even know how you'd pull it off on bass.
Yeah. All right. Well, that puts me at that puts us at your number 2. because I'm keeping track here. So your number 2 is Jump.
Right. So again, some of the praise I gave to Eddie at the beginning of your list, I'll give again. He's such a great rhythm keyboard player, and it's not talked about. He's so in the pocket on that song. And there's just a lot of things that were done right. The chords in the beginning, he's holding that low C, and then he's starting to play all these sus chords over the top of it, which just give it a feeling of, where are we going? What's next? It's optimistic, but we haven't landed. And he takes that low C, and then he finally lands on the G for the da-da-da at the end of that, riff we all know. And instead of playing a full G with a B at the top, he plays a C. So he takes this low C, moves it all the way up to the top, and so it still maintains the feeling of we haven't landed yet. Right. And that's why that song, to me, it just gives you the feeling of propulsion, not just in the percussion, but also in the chords. And also, I really like the bridge, because the bridge has this obscure key change for the solo where they're in the key of C, but they go to B flat minor. Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
I have no justification for why they do that, but it sounds great.
Yeah, I agree. The keyboard solo essentially in the middle there is very memorable. And
yeah, I think the keyboard solo, and if you really listen to it, it's pretty amazing. There's some stuff Eddie's doing in the upper registers of the keyboards that's so on time, with no ability to quantize. And the same could be said for Michael and Alex, by the way, because they're also equally in the pocket.
Oh, yeah, sure. This is all before digital recording. This is all DAT tape stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know the medium as well as you do, but...
it's because I'm old.
Well, you said it. But, yeah, they're all in the pocket. And, poor Michael Anthony, he's stuck on the root note a lot of the time. But, I mean, he's about as on as you can be with only having a click in your ear. So... yeah, those are the two main reasons I like the song.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. I don't have a lot to add to it. Like, this is the tune that I remember specifically getting played to death on VH1 and MTV.
Sure.
I must have seen this video 1,000 times.
I get it.
And I think maybe as a result of that oversaturation has made me just not appreciate it. Like,
it's interesting that your take on this is my take on Eruption. Because I was born in an era that wasn't playing this 24 hours a day, but I was born into a skill I was practicing that caused me to have to listen to Eruption damn near 24 hours a day. So I think, I think this is where the tables turn.
Sure. I think it's a great tune. Now, there's no knock against it as a tune. I just think for me personally, It's just kind of an oversaturated thing. All right, so we're at my number 1, which is, we already talked about it being a crossover. My number 1 is Panama.
Yeah.
I just think that it's the quintessential Van Halen tune to me. It hits it's every sort of cliche sound from it. It's that David Lee Roth earlier era. And you kind of walk away not even understanding what the song's about or the story necessarily. It's it's all about feel.
There's nonsense words. Ease into the back seat. Let me get on the off ramp.
What's that mean?
It's not even an innuendo anymore. He's literally talking about driving a car.
Yeah, right. But the energy of what they were doing at the time, I just think is really encapsulated in this particular track. And for me, that's the number 1. When you said I want to do a Van Halen, I'm like, well, Panama, right. And then I got to go listen to a bunch of other tunes.
Sure, yeah, and him and Hod, where I put Panama on my list. So I think if we decide on a common top 10, it'll be higher than where I placed it for sure.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. And then your number 1 is also a crossover.
Ice Cream Man.
Yeah, great tune.
So Ice Cream Man, this is purely personal. This is not chosen for anybody but me. This song, I had my compliments to give it earlier, but I think the reason I like this song so much is because not only was it never intended to be a hit, it is the number 1 song I get asked to play by Van Halen. Above Panama, above Jump, above Dance the Night Away. This is the song that people have been coming up to me to play since I was 13 years old. And I've gotten to play it live so many times with you.
Yeah.
With other bands, by myself. So this one I've just had a love for, I don't know, for the last 15 years.
Yeah, it's a charming tune because it's weird.
Yeah, right.
It's a weird tune. And interestingly, it kind of is. It doesn't showcase all the Van Halenisms like it could.
Right.
It's almost like weirdly aggressive, but toned back for Van Halen.
Well, they know they're playing a blues song. I mean, you can hear that at the end. They practiced the walk down. They got it right. And then Eddie does his thing over the top of it, and that encapsulates it right there. Is they know they're playing a blues song, but they're putting their spin on it. As an aside, an album that you'll never hear because it's not on any place that you can stream music, but it's the last album they released, which was A Different Kind of Truth, and that's when they brought David back, I think, in 2012. There's a song on there called "Stay Frosty," and it's a throwback to Ice Cream Man, and it's again the best song on the album for that reason. It's just weird, it's different, but they leaned into the blues and throwing Van Halen on top of it. So, yeah, Ice Cream Man is number one for me, and if you get a chance to pick up a copy of Different Kind of Truth, I would listen to Stay Frosty. That's my favorite on the album, and they never even released it as a single.
Wow, okay. Yeah, I'll have to look for that. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to negotiate what we think between our two different personalities and takes are what the quintessential Van Halen top 10 playlist ought to be. We'll be right back. All right, so after a brief pause there, we did some of the negotiating of the final list offline, just to not rehash anything that we've already talked about. And Marshall, did I convince you of anything?
Yeah, so Panama I already thought should be higher, but I think you really kind of stamping your foot down and saying this is the quintessential Van Halen sound is correct. Cool. I think that is their sound. To me, that sound was largely Running with the Devil, but I think for the casual listener, Panama is the one they should reach for rather than that.
Okay, fair, yeah.
And also, let me think. What was the other one? Yeah. So I admit Eruption is a song that you should listen to if you're going to listen to Van Halen. Yeah. I'm burnt out on it, but you should listen to it if you're going to appreciate Van Halen, because that's so much of what the sound was, is building around these virtuoso riffs. And so that kind of gives you the genesis of how that became accepted in the band and I guess in popular music at the time. And then what was the other one? Oh, I think we also booted. Do you want me to give them all?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think I also was willing to boot Everybody Wants Some in favor of Hot for Teacher, because to me, they're largely the same song. They showcase a lot of David's just charisma and willing to ad-lib on the fly.
Sure.
And they're both great songs. Actually, there's like a hidden 2/4 measure snuck into the solo of Hot for Teacher that I've always really liked. Yeah. So I think in terms of musicianship, that's the better song. And what was the other one? Oh, Take Your Whiskey Home. That was already really close for me. So I bumped that up the list, and I don't know. I don't remember which one I omitted, but once you see the list, I mean, you'll know.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a charming story that their dad was the clarinet player on that. I had no idea, and that's such a...
Yeah, it is interesting. They were a musical family.
But I'm thinking of the wrong song, am I?
Well, no, you're thinking of Big Bad Bill.
Oh, right.
Take Your Whiskey Home is another...
Oh, it's the other one that I had put... Right.
Yeah.
I am confused.
But it's just it's another groove. It's a great
Good thing
song.
we can edit.
Yeah.
So that's great. So we got a finalized list. Can you read that
Sure.
list off? Just go 10 back to 1?
Sure. So where to go here? Okay. So here's the agreed upon list. We both agreed that Ice Cream Man is at the top.
Yeah.
It's a fun, goofy song. It's a personal favorite. It might not epitomize everything that is Van Halen, but to me, it's everything I want Van Halen to be, and I'm glad they are. So it's top of my list, and I think Josh is willing to concede it's the top of his.
Yeah.
The second one for me, I still have here is Jump. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that for the same reasons that you felt about Eruption, I think that was my take on Jump. Is it permeated those high school years with VH1 and MTV. It was on every hour. It seemed like on one of those two channels, and what an era that's gone. And music, MTV, music videos are gone. But for my childhood, for that part of my life, it was a real important part of music. And I think it just got played to death, and I was just kind of burnt out on it. And I still kind of am, but for the same reasons, I think it is an essential Van Halen's tune.
Yeah, I don't think you could have a list without it. And then the third one, Panama, which I already conceded, that is a lot of the quintessential sound. Like if you're just going to pick one song from Van Halen to say, this is what that band is, that's probably Panama. And
Sure.
it's number 3 on the list for personal taste, but it's near the top because it's what the casual listener should gravitate towards.
Sure.
And then number 4, so I gave up Everybody Wants Some for Hot for Teacher.
Makes sense.
Hot for Teacher, again, great song, satisfies, my same need to have the Dave ad-libs in there, satisfies my need to show off Alex's chops.
Sure, yeah.
And I the guitar solo, again, I mentioned it at the top, but the little hidden 2/4 measure in there, and even the way the groove just changes altogether in the solo is really interesting. It's hard to keep up with it if you're actively listening to it.
Well, that particular tune, too, has got a great... ride pattern, like what he's doing.
Yeah.
It's a very staccato. You couldn't pull that off if you weren't playing on that big pasty bell of his ride cymbal.
It's like he's accenting at these weird times. I don't know, as a non-drummer, I don't know what's hard or not. It sounds hard.
Yeah, I think he's just playing on like the first 2 16th notes of every down beat. So it's 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E.
Okay.
I think that's what he's doing on the
like
bell.
A shuffle.
Yeah, but in straight time, it's really a cool groove and difficult. That's a difficult groove to pull off.
Yeah, again, I'm playing it back in my head. I'm looking forward to listening to this on the ride home. Okay, so I still kept running with The Devil on the List, but I bumped it down to number 5 because I feel like a lot of what that song accomplishes is accomplished by Panama. But it's still high on the list for me because it's their very first song released on their very first album, and it's what drew everybody's ear to Van Halen,
sure,
mine included.
Yeah, that makes sense. The first cut of a lot of these bands, not so much solo artists, but band albums. The first cut of the first album is magical,
right?
Like for all of them. I mean, Anyway, yeah, I can think of a number of the tunes of the bands, and I don't like to talk ahead of turn here, but yeah, that the first cut of the first album is just important. That's what makes people listen to the rest of the damn album.
Yeah, right. I know I don't want to spoil your next episodes, but my head is flooding with them right now too. So there's that, and then Little Guitars, which is not on a greatest hits list anywhere. We popped in at number 6. Great syncopation, great writing, just an interesting sounding song that's kind of a departure for everybody in the group, really.
Yeah, and I'm surprised. Like that's a very well constructed musical tune. I'm kind of surprised that that's not a staple, really, of Van Halen.
Yeah, and you don't see it played live very much. Again, when I was doing my homework, I only found one video of them playing it live, and it's very grainy footage. So they clearly didn't do it a lot, which is surprising to me. And it's also surprising because it was preceded by Spanish Fly, which was another instrumental that somehow, as an acoustic flamenco track, flowed into this completely opposite sounding groove flawlessly. So, yeah, Little Guitars is one that's worth listening to, and you won't find it on any other list. And then Take Your Whiskey Home. So that one's number 7 now. It wasn't on my list originally, and I'm trying to remember.
Look at me making a move.
Yeah, so you booted a Hagar tune from my list. So instead of 5150 there, which, again, I love the song, but Take Your Whiskey Home was so close for me, I popped it in instead of 5150. I was willing to concede that one.
Yeah, cool.
Great tune. Again, a great transition, kind of like Ice Cream Man is a great acoustic to rock transition. This one, in terms of song construction, I actually think it's better. But the charm of Ice Cream Man, I just can't let go of.
Sure.
And then after that, number 8, we've got Big Bad Bill, which is that vaudeville song we were talking about before, where the Van Halen dad came in and played clarinet. Again, it's not on any greatest hits list that you'll hear of, but that song is on the Diver Down album, which again, it was a kind of an underplayed album that showcased a lot of their versatility. Like for example, the last song on that album, Happy Trails, is their a cappella song. Another one worth listening to, but not on the list. Number 9, we've got Finish What You Started. Sammy Hagar tune.
Yeah.
And sadly, the only Hagar tune on the list.
I mean, that's an interesting thing because, I think that even though I think we both agreed that there's no hate for Sammy Hagar to only give him one tune at the end of it, I like, we talked about this a little bit off microphone, but I don't think it has to do with a dislike of any of the material he did, but he wasn't part of building the iconic sound.
Yeah.
You know, I mean...
I don't know how else to say that, but yeah, I think that's true. It was a different band when he joined up, and it was a great band. But to me, it just wasn't Van Halen anymore. It was, as people say, Van Hagar.
Right.
Fantastic band, just different.
Yeah. And they still tried to put the little sprinkle of nuggets that are familiar. This is still Van Halen, but when you change a lead singer, that's a pretty big departure. It's tough to have a new front guy or girl or front person come in and try to keep that identity. You know, the identity of a band really is reflected, you know,
on the lead singer. I mean,
yeah,
it really, I mean, the vocal is far more signature than the guitar tone is, even in a band like Van Halen, where the tone of the guitar is so signature. There's so few bands that can pull that off. I'm trying to think of ones that do it successfully. Like AC/DC pulled it off great, but it was still a different band.
Sure.
It doesn't sound like, you know, Dirty Deeds and Back in Black are two very different sounds.
Well, and I think of like Fleetwood Mac didn't pull it off at all. It was I mean, they kept the name, but
right.
Like Peter Green Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks Fleetwood Mac and Lindsay, I mean,
it's night and day.
It's like it's almost unfair to recycle the name.
Sure.
You know, and Genesis to me is also similar. I think that Peter Gabriel's Genesis versus Phil Collins' Genesis
are very different.
Come on.
I mean, and there's so much tongue-in-cheek joy that comes with watching the drummer come up front and make the band even bigger than it was before Peter Gabriel.
And what's and that's, well, I don't want to go on a whole Genesis subtopic here, but I'm gonna. It's so interesting because as a drummer, the Peter Gabriel Genesis is so much more interesting to me. When Phil was really just a drummer.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
Phil Collins, like Genesis, is some of the greatest drum recording.
Some like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Is one of the. I go back to that one all the time, and not just for the drumming, obviously, but yeah, I can see why you'd say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's some of the most phenomenal drumming ever done and ever recorded. And then when Phil sort of took that front guy position, It's almost like, I don't know if it was I don't know what happened, but the drumming kind of just turned into basic pop stuff.
Well, I can't even imagine how hard it would be as a drummer to sing at the same time.
Yeah, and I don't know what the dynamics were with that, because I think that I can't think of who that drummer is, but they had a pocket drummer. When Phil sort of became the front person, like when they would play live on tour, there was a second drummer.
Was there always? Because I could have sworn I watched some videos of them playing live and Phil was on the kit. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Huh. Chester Thompson, maybe, is his name. This is probably all going to get edited out. I'm regretting going down this rabbit trail. But
I'll leave it in.
Yeah, we probably, I don't know. We'll see. If I'm right about Chester Thompson, I'm leaving it in. If I'm wrong, it's going to go and get cut. Is the way this is going to go. But but anyway, totally different bands, and Van Halen kind of suffers, or maybe not suffers, but experiences the same kind of growing pain problem. It's so hard to replace your front person,
right,
and maintain the identity. Although I do think that they were remarkably better at it than the Fleetwood Mac and Genesis counterparts.
Sure. And I think that's probably because the rhythm section, well, no, because what I was about to say was that the rhythm section was so strong beforehand, but so was Fleetwood Mac. I mean, they're all phenomenal musicians. So, yeah, I don't know why they were able to still catch a lot of the magic, but as evidenced by our list, clearly not all of it, because only one Hagar tune made it.
Yeah. So. All right, so what's number 10?
All right, number 10, Eruption. I conceded, I've heard Eruption a billion times, but if you haven't, you need to hear it at least once. So listen to the list, and then it finishes up with Eruption, which tells you everything you need to know about Eddie Van Halen and why Van Halen was able to accomplish a lot of the guitar feats that it did.
Cool. Well, great. Great list. Thanks for joining me on this Pilot Zero episode, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. How about you?
I had a lot of fun. I mean, for going live without a net, as Van Halen would say, I think we did pretty good. I don't know how much editing you're going to have to do, but I'm looking forward to the next episodes.
So what do you have coming up gig wise? I mean, we've got the Grover gigs, and I'm sure that I'll end up plugging those as this goes on. Do you have anything else going on right now?
I mean, I usually ask you.
That's true.
So
what about your amplifier project? You want to talk about that for a bit?
Sure. Quick plug. So right now I'm in the process of putting together my own stomp box, really. What it is it's the preamplification circuit of an amplifier. So that in itself is not novel. Having something on the ground that is essentially the tonal center of your amp that you can plug into any amp and make it sound like that amp, that's not terribly novel. To put it even simpler, what if I have a Fender amp and I want it to sound like a Marshall? Well, something you can do to emulate that is grab the preamp section of the Marshall, which is fairly small, and put it in the front end of your Fender. That's been done before. What I'm doing a little different is I'm taking 3 preamp sections from 3 different amps. So it's going to be a Vox AC30, a Fender Super Reverb, and then a Marshall Super Lead. Interestingly enough, the same model that Eddie Van Halen used. I guess maybe not surprising.
Yeah.
But I'm actually putting them all into one box, and it's still all valve driven. So it's not, we'll say, solid state technology in a sense that it's all driven by transistors and diodes. Valves are the source of where the amplification and the distortion are coming from. And it's a very different feel for guitar players. Tonally, we've come to a place where you can get pretty close with the solid state hardware, but you'll never capture the feel of valves and tubes, I'll say. We say tubes, the people in the UK say valves.
Got it.
But anyway, you'll never get to that place. So what I'm doing is I'm putting together a box that's maybe like, 8 inches wide by 5 inches deep. So it's a decent sized box, but it's got all the controls of these 3 amplifiers, and then it's digitally controlled. So it's all analog circuitry with a digital brain. And you can save all the presets you want. So you bring this to a gig and any amplifier you want. You can buy a cheap Blues Junior at the store. It doesn't matter. You plug this into the back of it, you have 3 world-renowned amps that you've heard on records, since the beginning of recording electric guitars, at your fingertips.
So you're just using that as a speaker, and this is essentially
Yeah, essentially what it's doing is it's allowing not only the pedals you've already bought to bond with these amplifiers that they're really designed to bond with. Because some pedals you buy aren't really meant for Blues Juniors. They're not meant for certain models. They're meant for a family that falls under one of these 3 amps that I'm putting in the box. And then you just plug it into the power amp section or the front end. It's your choice. It's a different sound, but they're both good. And you really utilize the power amp section and the speaker from whatever amp you have. It can be cheap. It doesn't matter. You use that as the amplification unit to drive the tone that you would want to get from an amp that, would be 10 times more to buy.
Right on. So what's the timeline for this for you?
So I'm hoping to have it done by August. We're setting up prototypes right now. The circuitry is already done, and I'm working with an engineer, Nicholas Maris, down in Union City. He's doing the designs. Jim Welsh up in Auburn, he's going to be doing the firmware writing. And I handle the mechanical engineering of it. So I'm the one that makes sure everything fits, all the valves are correct and placed in such a way that they're not going to, damage any of the components, and that the user is safe and it's meeting all the safety compliance and whatnot. So
fantastic. So if anyone's listening to this and wanted to, was interested in this particular piece of hardware that you're designing and going to have to come to market and wanted to reach out to you, how could they reach you, Marshall?
So the company that this will be released under is called Skyline Amps. So you can go to www.skylineamps.com and simply reach out to us via our contact form to get on the wait list.
Fantastic.
We're going to be releasing a finite number of these, so we're only releasing anywhere from 50 to 100, and then we'll see how market sales go, and then we'll release another 50 to 100 next year. But they're always going to be in small tranches. So if you're interested, reach out to me now.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to the first episode of Playlist Parlay, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much. If you enjoy this content, please visit our website at playlistparlay.com. There, you'll find a link to our Discord server where you can chat with me, our guests, and other community members. If you really enjoyed the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is also on our website. Thank you for listening.